12 minutes. That's all it took for the USS Indianapolis to vanish into the Pacific, leaving nearly 900 men to face a 5-day nightmare of thirst madness and the most infamous shark attacks in human history. But long before she became a graveyard 3.5 miles below the surface, she was a vessel of destiny entrusted with a top-secret cargo that would end World War II, the components of the atomic bomb. Little Boy. For over 70 years, her final resting place remained one of the ocean's greatest mysteries. A haunting blank spot on the map, shrouded in the crushing absolute blackness of the Philippine Sea. That changed in 2017, when a team of explorers finally pierced the gloom, revealing a ship remarkably preserved by the very abyss that claimed her. Today we are going beyond the headlines. We're heading 18,000 feet down to witness a time capsule of iron and tragedy. From the eerie sight of anti-aircraft guns still loaded for a battle that ended 8 decades ago, to the stark white hull numbers still gleaming in the dark. This is the USS Indianapolis as you've never seen her before. Welcome to the deep. Finding a needle in a haystack is a common metaphor. But finding the USS Indianapolis was more like finding a single grain of sand in a pitch-black desert 3.5 miles beneath the waves. For decades, the ship didn't just feel lost, it felt erased. When the cruiser slipped beneath the surface at 12:14 a.m. on July 30th, 1945, she didn't leave a trail. There was no successful distress signal, no GPS coordinates, and for the Navy, no realization that she was even missing until days later when survivors were spotted by sheer luck from the air. This lack of data created a search area so vast and a depth so extreme that for 72 years, the Indianapolis remained a ghost. To understand the impossibility of the search, you have to understand the environment. At 18,000 feet, the pressure is nearly 8,000 pounds per square inch. It is a world of eternal night where the temperature hovers just above freezing, and the terrain is a jagged, unforgiving landscape of volcanic silt and mountainous ridges. Early attempts to locate the wreck in 2001 and 2005 were more than just expensive, they were heartbreaking. Each failed expedition felt like a second loss for the aging survivors who were desperate for closure, hoping to see the Indy one last time before they passed away. The ocean seemed determined to keep its secrets, and by 2016, many believed the ship would never be found. However, the breakthrough didn't come from a high-tech sensor, but from a forgotten piece of paper. In 2016, a naval historian uncovered a log from a tank landing ship called LST-779. It turned out that on the day before the sinking, the Indianapolis had passed this vessel in the open sea. This single recorded encounter provided a new definitive data point. By recalculating the ship's speed and heading from that specific moment, researchers were able to narrow the search box significantly. It was the digital equivalent of a breadcrumb trail in the middle of a wasteland. Armed with this new intelligence, the late billionaire and philanthropist Paul Allen deployed his state-of-the-art research vessel, the RV Petrel. The Petrel was a marvel of modern engineering, equipped with autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, capable of scanning the seafloor with high-resolution sonar for hours on end. On August 19, 2017, the team was monitoring the sonar feed when a massive man-made silhouette emerged from the grainy blue static of the monitor. There, resting on the abyssal plain, was a debris field that told a violent story. The sonar didn't just show a ship, it showed a massive impact crater, evidence of the incredible velocity at which the Indianapolis hit the bottom. The hull had been torn apart by the torpedoes and the subsequent plunge, but the core of the ship remained. As the ROV's cameras finally drifted toward the wreckage, the team wasn't just looking at rusted steel. They were looking at a sacred site, a place where time had stopped in 1945. The search was over, but the journey into the blackness of the deep was just beginning. As the ROV Petrel descended through the water column, then the only visual reference for thousands of feet was the constant hypnotic drift of marine snow, organic detritus slowly falling to the abyssal plain. Then, at 500 meters, the darkness finally yielded to the high-intensity LEDs of the submersible. The first shapes to emerge from the gloom were not chaotic debris, but distinct man-made lines. It is a sight that invariably sends a chill through anyone watching the sudden realization that an object of immense human engineering is sitting where it absolutely does not belong. The initial impression of the USS Indianapolis is not one of destruction, but of shocking, almost supernatural preservation. At this extreme depth, there is very little oxygen and no sunlight to fuel the rapid corrosion seen on shallower wrecks like the Titanic. The Indianapolis does not look like a rusted skeleton. She looks like a phantom ship draped in a fine layer of grayish silt. As the ROV maneuvered closer to the forward section of the hull, the original haze gray paint adopted by the Navy late in the war became clearly visible, still clinging stubbornly to the steel plating. And then came the moment of absolute confirmation. The ROV pilot slowly panned the camera along the port bow, wiping away the decades with light. There, shining out of the blackness with an almost phosphorescent intensity, was the number 35. It was crisp, defiant, and impossibly white. Seeing that number painted by sailors who had no idea of the fate awaiting them bridges the gap of 80 years in an instant. It transforms the wreckage from a mere sonar target into the tomb of a decorated warship. However, as the camera pulled back, the full scope of the tragedy came into terrifying focus. The bow of the Indianapolis is not attached to the rest of the ship. The first Japanese torpedo, a Type 95, had slammed into the starboard side near the bow, compromising the ship's structural integrity instantly. As the cruiser began its final fatal plunge, the immense drag forces ripped the entire bow section away. It now rests separate from the main hull, a violent amputation frozen in time. Yet even on this severed section, the details are mesmerizing. The massive starboard anchor remains locked tight in its hawse pipe, its heavy chain running down into the mud, forever waiting for an order to drop that will never come. Along the hull rows of portholes gaze out into the void, some still sealed tight against the ocean, others missing their glass, clogged with the sediment of the deep sea, offering dark, silent glimpses into the crew's living quarters. Moving away from the eerie stillness of the bow, the ROV's thrusters kick up clouds of ancient dust as we travel toward the ship's stern. If the bow is a monument to a ship frozen in time, the stern is a testament to the sheer, unadulterated violence of the deep. Here, the narrative of the USS Indianapolis changes from one of a graceful sinking to a chaotic, high-velocity collapse. The stern did not simply settle into the mud. It crashed into it with the force of a falling mountain, and the evidence of that impact is written in every jagged line of mangled steel. The first thing that strikes you as the lights of the ROV hit the aft section is the sheer distortion of the ship's geometry. It is as if a giant hand reached down and crumpled the heavy steel plating like a discarded soda can. This is structural chaos on a scale that is hard to process. The decks, which once echoed with the rhythmic footsteps of sailors and the hum of the ship's powerful turbines, are now compressed into a jagged, unrecognizable mass of metal. In some areas, the decks have pancaked so severely that the vertical space between them has vanished entirely, leaving a solid block of crushed iron where once there were living quarters and mess halls. The primary culprit behind this devastation is a phenomenon known as implosion. When the Indianapolis began its vertical race to the bottom, she was sinking at a terrifying speed. Because she went down so quickly, just 12 minutes from the first torpedo hit to the final plunge, massive pockets of air remained trapped within the compartments of the stern. As the ship plummeted into the abyss, the external water pressure increased exponentially. At some point during the descent, the structural integrity of the hull could no longer withstand the thousands of pounds of pressure pushing inward against those air pockets. The result was a series of instantaneous, catastrophic implosions. The steel didn't just bend, it shattered and folded inward at supersonic speeds, shredding the interior of the ship before it even reached the sea floor. This violence is most visible in the gun tubs. On the surface, these circular platforms were designed to be perfectly level, providing a stable base for the ship's defensive weaponry. Now, because of the internal collapse of the decks below them, they are tilted at impossible near vertical angles. They point toward the distant surface like silent, accusing fingers. The teak decking, which remarkably survived in patches on the main hull, is here splintered and buried under the weight of the collapsed superstructure. Looking at the sonar data provided by the Petrel, the violence of the arrival is further confirmed. The stern lies at the center of a massive impact crater, a scar on the abyssal plain that stretches far beyond the ship itself. When the main hull finally struck the bottom, the kinetic energy was so immense that it sent shockwaves through the seabed, throwing up a wall of sediment and burying the lower half of the stern in a thick shroud of volcanic silt. It is a scene of utter ruin, a stark contrast to the Defiant 35 found on the bow. It serves as a grim reminder that while the deep sea can preserve it, first destroys with a power that defies human imagination. The Indianapolis didn't just find a resting place. She fought the ocean all the way down, and the stern bears the heavy scars of that final losing battle. Leaving the twisted, mangled ruins of the stern behind, the ROV glides toward the midships and the debris field where we encounter the most chilling aspect of the USS Indianapolis. It is one thing to see a ship destroyed by physics and pressure. It is quite another to see her weapons still manned by the ghosts of a battle that ended 8 decades ago. As the lights of the submersible sweep over the various gun mounts, the transition from a shipwreck to a war grave becomes profoundly personal. These are not just artifacts. They are the steel witnesses to the crew's final desperate attempt to defend their home. We begin with the 5-inch 25 caliber secondary guns. Standing tall against the abyssal currents, these guns appear remarkably intact. The ROV moves in close, its lens inches away from the muzzles, and the detail is staggering. You can still see the intricate rifling inside the barrels, the spiral grooves designed to spin a shell for accuracy, looking as sharp as the day they were machined at the Navy Yard. The gunners' seats remain in place, and the elevation gears, though covered in a fine dusting of silt, look as though they could still turn if a hand were to reach out from the darkness. There is a defiant posture to these weapons. They remain pointed skyward, eternally searching the black void for an enemy that has long since vanished from the skies. But the true climax of this underwater survey, the image that has haunted historians and veterans alike, is found at the 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft mounts. On most shipwrecks, these weapons are found stripped broken or empty. But on the Indianapolis, They tell a story of a crew that was at battle stations until the very end. As the ROV camera zooms in through the murky blue light passing over the gun tubs, it reveals a sight almost unique in the world of deep-sea archaeology. The guns are still loaded. They're nestled in the loading racks, and clipped into the firing mechanisms are the brass casings of the 40mm shells. You can see the distinct shape of the ammunition clips still seated in the trays, waiting for a trigger pull that never came. Seeing these ready rounds after 80 years in the blackness of the deep creates a visceral sense of frozen time. It suggests a frantic scene on deck. In those final 12 minutes, sailors slamming clips into the loader's eyes, scanning the horizon for the submarine that had just crippled them, refusing to give up until the Pacific claimed the deck beneath their feet. The brass, protected by a thin layer of oxidation, still carries a dull glint, a golden reminder of the ship's lethal purpose. Finally, we reach the big-ticket item, the stern 888-inch turret. While the forward turrets were ripped from their barbettes as the ship capsized and plummeted, this massive structure remains snugly in place, pointing straight aft. It is a gargantuan piece of machinery looking almost pristine despite the structural collapse of the hull directly behind it. The three massive barrels are angled slightly downward, a result of the deck caving in under the weight of the impact. But the turret itself remains a symbol of American naval might. It sits there in the silent, crushing dark, a heavy metal tombstone for a cruiser that carried the world's most dangerous secret, only to be taken down by two well-placed torpedoes and the unforgiving laws of the sea. As we pull away from the silent sentinels of the gun batteries, the ROV's lights sweep one last time over the surrounding debris field. It is here, among the smaller scattered fragments of the ship's life, that the grand tragedy of the Indianapolis becomes localized and painfully human. Amidst the fields of jagged steel and aluminum, the camera catches glimpses of a life, interrupted a crushed aircraft hangar, a tangled mess of electrical wiring, and the tail section of a scout plane that once launched from her decks to scan the horizon for the very enemy that would eventually sink her. Perhaps the most haunting image in this entire debris field is a simple, unremarkable object, a box of spare parts half buried in the volcanic silt. On any other wreck, it would be a shapeless lump of rust. But here in the oxygen-depleted blackness of the Philippine Sea, the white stenciled lettering on the side of the box is still perfectly, impossibly legible. It is a direct communication from 1945, a mundane detail of naval maintenance that survived a 3-mile fall and 8 decades of isolation. It serves as a jarring reminder that this ship wasn't just a machine of war. It was a home to 195 men who ate, slept, and worked within these walls until the moment the ocean claimed them. Nearby, a fragment of the hull plating reveals a kill tally painted with pride by the crew. 9 Japanese flags are still visible, a testament to the ship's distinguished service before her final mission. It is a poignant irony that a ship which helped deliver the end of the war, carrying the heart of the little boy atomic bomb, did not live to see the peace she helped create. The USS Indianapolis now rests in a place where time has no meaning. She is no longer a fast transport or flagship. She is a sacred site, a war grave protected by the crushing weight and absolute silence of the abyss. The decision by the Discovery team to keep her exact coordinates a secret was a gesture of profound respect. Down there in the blackness of the deep, she is safe from scavengers and trophy hunters. She belongs to the 879 sailors and Marines who never came home, a massive steel monument to a nightmare that the world must never forget. Watching these images, it is easy to feel the weight of that history. The Indy remains one of the most powerful stories of the human spirit's will to survive against impossible odds, and her wreck is the final chapter of that epic. As the ROV begins its long ascent back to the world of light and air, the Indianapolis fades back into the darkness, standing watch over the deep as she has for the last 80 years. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the abyss. Stories like the USS Indianapolis remind us that history isn't just in the books, it's still out there waiting in the dark to be rediscovered. If you find these deep-sea explorations as moving as we do, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell. It helps us continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to the surface. Leave a comment below to let us know which shipwreck we should explore next. Until then, we'll see you in the next one, back in the deep.